Eddard Stark stood on the eastern battlements of Winterfell, his breath curling into the cold air in wispy clouds. Snow dusted every stone and parapet, reflecting the pale light of dawn. Months had passed since he returned from King's Landing with Sansa and Arya, leaving behind the labyrinth of courtiers, the austerity of King Stannis' reign, and the aftermath of the war that had reshaped the Seven Kingdoms. That war, sparked by Cersei Lannister's deceit and finally resolved by Tywin Lannister's surrender, had ended with fewer rivers of blood than most expected. Yet countless troubles lingered, like ghosts in the halls of memory. In the quiet hush of the north, with winter settled firmly, Ned often reflected on how close the realm had come to tearing itself apart. A layer of hoarfrost clung to the stones beneath his boots, crunching softly each time he shifted his weight. This was the north he knew, the same place where he had grown up, yet a realm subdued by the swirl of events he had once tried so hard to control. He ran a hand over the rugged surface of the battlement, half listening to the distant howls of a wolf across the tundra. The dire wolves that roamed near Winterfell, some bound to his children, served as reminders of the old ways, enduring beyond the politics of kings. He turned at the sound of footsteps. Ser Roderick Castle approached with cautious steps, leaning forward as if to brace himself against the icy wind. The knight bowed his gray head in greeting. "My lord, your presence is requested in the courtyard. We have a visitor." Ned nodded, drawing his cloak tighter around him. "A visitor? We have had few of those this deep into winter. Who braves these roads?" Roderick's mustache twitched with curiosity. "A knight bearing the sigil of the Crownlands arrived late last night. He and a small retinue claim to bear messages from King Stannis. They waited for dawn to present themselves." Ned felt a pang of concern. The last messages from King's Landing had spoken of relative calm, the realm hunkering down for winter. What urgent matter would lead the king to send an envoy through such perilous conditions? "Very well, I'll speak to them." They descended the winding stairs, boots echoing on stone. Outside, the sky brightened slowly, a pale sun blurred by low gray clouds. In the courtyard, stable boys tended to horses that steamed in the cold, while a handful of Stark guards stood watchful. The envoy wore heavy cloaks, crusted with snow and road grime. Their leader, a lanky knight perhaps in his late 30s, stepped forward and inclined his head with due respect. "My Lord Stark," he said, his voice hoarse from the chill. "I am Ser Lambert Lockleigh, dispatched by His Grace, King Stannis Baratheon, to bring news of events in the south, and to deliver certain requests." Lockleigh's men also dipped their heads. Ned looked them over, seeing no immediate sign of subterfuge. "Welcome to Winterfell, Ser Lambert," he replied, keeping his tone civil. "You come a long way in the dead of winter. Pray warm yourselves by our hearth, and then we can speak." Within the great hall, a modest fire crackled. Sansa and Arya had not yet appeared for the morning meal, but they would likely join soon. Catelyn, informed of the visitor, was busy ensuring the kitchens provided hot mulled wine for the weary travelers. Ned directed Ser Lambert and his men to a bench near the fire. The Southerners gratefully shed their outer layers, revealing the gold-bordered surcoats of the Crownlands that bore Stannis' crowned stag sigil. Once they were settled, Ned spoke quietly. "We are eager to hear what brings you so far north. I trust King Stannis remains in good health." Lambert looked uneasy for just a moment, then nodded. "His Grace is well, my lord, though wearied by the burdens of rule. The realm endures this winter in better shape than some feared, but troubles begin to stir. The purpose of my mission is twofold." He paused, accepting a cup of steaming wine from a servant before continuing. "Firstly, King Stannis has uncovered certain plots in King's Landing. Rumors speak of new conspiracies aiming to restore Joffrey or enthrone the younger Lannister children, should Tywin find some opportunity. Additionally, some fear that the Targaryen girl across the sea gathers her strength. Whether she poses an immediate threat is unknown, but the king is not blind to the possibility." Ned felt his jaw tense. Tywin surrendered, Jaime was sent to the wall, and the Lannisters offered hostages. Is that arrangement failing? Lockleigh shrugged. "Not openly. Tywin remains quiet in the Westerlands, but men whisper that he is biding his time, waiting for weaknesses in Stannis' rule. As for the Targaryen girl, the king's informants say she has 3 dragons, though many call that claim nonsense. Ned inhaled slowly. Dragons returning to Westeros sounded like a fever dream, yet he had seen enough strange twists of fate to dismiss nothing outright. And the second purpose of your mission? Lambert's eyes flicked around, noting the few servants lingering. His Grace requests that you, Lord Stark, travel south again, at least to Moat Cailin, to confer with an envoy of the crown. A grand council might be called in spring, once the roads improve, to address these looming issues. King Stannis believes your voice is needed to keep the realm united. There are lords who remain uncertain, perhaps swayed by Lannister gold or Targaryen dreams. Weariness washed over Ned. He had only recently found peace at Winterfell after that harrowing time in King's Landing, serving his hand. But if the realm demanded it, duty would call him once more. I am reluctant to leave my family this deep into winter. Moat Cailin is still far, and the path is treacherous. However, I understand the need to maintain unity. Lambert nodded. The king will not press you to come all the way to the capital in winter, but if you can meet a royal delegation at Moat Cailin, your council would help shape the next steps. Ned stared into the fire, mind churning. Stannis had told him upon his departure that he might remain in the north unless the realm faced new threats. Clearly, the king now perceived a threat worthy of summoning him. I will consider the request, Ser Lambert. Rest here for a night or 2. Let your men recover. Then I will give you my answer, along with letters to the king. Later that morning, Ned convened with Catelyn in their solar to discuss the matter. She wore a thick woolen gown, her auburn hair pinned up, a slight furrow creasing her brow. Snow drifted past the windows. It is always something, is it not? She murmured after Ned recounted Lockleigh's words. We have spent months enjoying a fragile peace. I feared it would not last. Ned took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin. Peace never seems to endure in Westeros. At least Stannis tries to keep the realm united. If Tywin truly stirs again, or the Targaryen girl is forging alliances, ignoring the problem might invite a worse crisis later. Catelyn sighed. You only just returned to Winterfell. Must we risk sending you south again, even if only to Moat Cailin? The roads are perilous, and once you go, who knows what demands might follow. I have a duty, Ned said gently. If I can help shape these negotiations, perhaps we can prevent another war. I doubt Stannis would muster men to invade the Westerlands in winter, but Tywin might see weakness if the crown does nothing. We must show unity, or old resentments will fester. She studied him for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. Very well, but be careful, Ned. I cannot shake the memory of how close we all came to disaster before. His thoughts flickered to the memory of stepping around Cersei's deceptions in King's Landing, bribing the City Watch, arresting the Queen, dethroning Joffrey in one swift stroke. Yes, it had been too close. I'll be cautious, he promised. This time, we have King Stannis firmly enthroned, with Renly and the Tyrells standing by him. The realm is not as fractious as it was under Robert's final days. I pray that is enough. Word soon spread among the castle staff that Lord Stark would ride south to Moat Cailin to meet with a royal delegation. Sansa and Arya received the news with mixed reactions. Sansa, who had grown more solemn since her experiences in King's Landing, tried to hide her worry, but her eyes betrayed it. Arya reacted with frustration, wanting to ride with him, but Ned insisted she stay under her mother's care. Winterfell needed stability, and the roads were too dangerous for a child. Arya, though disappointed, eventually conceded. Bran, whose legs still had not healed from his fall long ago, spent most days overseeing Winterfell's ravens and the younger children. He asked if he could join Ned, citing a desire to learn more of the wider realm. But Ned told him that the traveling conditions were too difficult for his constraints. Rickon was too young to understand much, though he clung to his father and demanded that he return soon. Catelyn reassured the boys that Ned would not vanish for too long. Within a few days, Supplies were gathered, horses shod, and a troop of 24 men chosen to accompany him. They planned to skirt the worst drifts by following known trails, but the journey would still take longer than in fair weather. Ser Lambert's party rested until the date of departure, then prepared to travel with Ned to Moat Cailin. Early one frosty morning, the gates of Winterfell creaked open, and Ned Stark rode out at the head of his small column, cloak swirling in the biting wind. Behind him, the fortress of his fathers receded into the swirl of white. Catelyn stood upon the walls, watching until he vanished from sight. A hush lay over the courtyard as the watchers returned to their duties. The sense of departure weighed heavily on all. Even with the realm at peace, one never knew what perils might arise. Ned felt that truth in his bones as he pressed onward through fields and forests glazed with ice. The journey south was slow, broken by the frequent need to clear snowdrifts or navigate around frozen marshes. On the second night, they sheltered in a half-ruined tower that once belonged to a minor house. There, by the flicker of torches, Ned spoke quietly with Ser Lambert about King's Landing's current state. The night's answers revealed that not all was as calm as official letters suggested. Factions in court whispered that Stannis' severity might alienate the common folk. Peter Baelish tried to keep the treasury afloat, but the Iron Bank pressed for repayments. Tyrion Lannister remained under polite confinement, allowed to roam the city but not to depart. Varys continued to gather whispers of possible Targaryen supporters, though the evidence remained murky. "Does the king truly believe in the rumors of dragons?" Ned asked, huddled under furs. Lambert shrugged, looking uneasy. "Melisandre, the Red Priestess, has told the king that the dragons live again. Some men scorn her visions, but the king does not dismiss them lightly. He does not know if the Targaryen girl can truly bring them to Westeros, but he will not be caught unprepared." Ned nodded gravely, remembering the priestess's strange aura at court. She had spoken of shadows across the sea. Perhaps she saw more than men realized. "So be it. We shall see what can be done." On they traveled, day after day, the wind slicing at their faces. A few travelers appeared on the roads, mostly fur traders or local folk scrounging for winter provisions. Many recognized Lord Stark's banners and bowed respectfully, though few lingered in the cold. Midway through the journey, the riders encountered a pack of stray wolves near a frozen stream. The animals prowled at a distance, howling mournful notes. One of Ned's men commented that the snows forced wolves down from the mountains, searching for game. No conflict arose, but it reminded them all of winter's harsh demands. At last, in the early hours of a gloomy morning, they spotted the tall silhouettes of Moat Cailin's ancient towers rising from the swampy approach. Fog clung to the murky waters around the ruined fortress. Even in winter, the bogs of the Neck held a grim aura, the partially collapsed walls standing like silent sentinels. Catelyn had once spoken of the difficulty of capturing Moat Cailin from the south. Now, Ned felt a faint pang of nostalgia for simpler times, when it was only the north that concerned him. They rode into the fortress's courtyard, little more than a patch of half-frozen mud. Some wooden structures had been erected, presumably for the king's men. Lanterns bobbed in the chilly gloom. Immediately, a group of soldiers wearing the Stag and Flame banner approached, saluting. One stepped forward, a short man with a salt and pepper beard. "Lord Stark, welcome. I am Ser Justin Massey, assigned by King Stannis to lead this outpost." Ned dismounted carefully, stretching his stiff limbs. "My thanks. I expected to meet only a small delegation. Are you many here?" Ser Justin gestured around. "No more than 36 men. We keep watch for brigands and ensure safe passage for any official travelers. The king intends that you meet a royal envoy within 2 days. We received a raven that they had set out from the south." That gave Ned pause. "Who leads this envoy?" "A name you know well, my lord. Ser Davos Seaworth, the hand of the king, rides at its head." Ned felt a small surge of relief. Davos was an honest man, if somewhat unpolished by noble standards. He would speak truly about the state of the realm. "Excellent. We shall wait here for his arrival." Moat Cailin offered scant comfort, but the men set up tents within the partial shelter of its ruined walls. Fires crackled in iron braziers, casting wavering shadows on crumbled stone. Ned found an intact tower room, drafty but functional, for his personal quarters. While waiting for Davos, he read old letters from Winterfell, ensuring his mind lingered on the home he missed. Sansa wrote that Arya had resumed practicing archery with direwolf-like intensity, while Bran studied the histories of the North. Rickon demanded to know when Ned would return. Catelyn's words were more careful, urging him to remain vigilant. Ned penned short replies, entrusting them to ravens that the garrison kept, hoping the messages would reach Winterfell despite the harsh conditions. 2 days later, horns sounded from the southern approach. Ned and Ser Lambert ventured forth to the gate, where they beheld a column of riders bearing Baratheon banners. At their forefront rode Ser Davos Seaworth, wearing thick gloves and a cloak lined with fur to ward off the cold. His face, marked by the missing fingertips he had lost long ago, broke into a relieved smile upon seeing Ned. "My Lord Stark," Davos called, dismounting. "It has been too long since we parted in King's Landing. I am grateful we can speak in less chaotic times." Ned clasped Davos's hand. "You are Hand of the King now, Ser Davos, so I suspect times are still somewhat chaotic. But I am glad to see you. Let us find shelter from this chill." Inside the largest wooden hall that the outpost had constructed, the men gathered around a broad table, candles flickering against the gloom. Davos's retinue included a few knights and courtiers, none of them especially grand. Davos explained that Stannis had sent him north to coordinate a possible muster of northern houses in the event that Tywin, the Targaryen girl, or another threat arose. But more importantly, Stannis wished Ned's counsel on a rumored new rebellion brewing in Dorne. Davos spread out a map, tapping the southernmost region with a scarred finger. "We have unconfirmed reports that certain lords in Dorne chafe under Stannis' rule. They remember Elia Martell's fate, they recall how Robert's rebellion ended for House Targaryen, and they have no love for a Baratheon king. Some say they might throw in their lot with the Targaryen girl, should she appear in Westeros with dragons. The king hopes to send an envoy to Dorne as a gesture of goodwill, but he fears they may rebuff him." Ned listened intently, recalling that Dorne had never truly forgave the brutal deaths of Princess Elia and her children at the hands of Lannister bannermen during the sack of King's Landing. "So King Stannis wants me to attend a new Grand Council to discuss how to appease or contain Dorne?" Davos nodded. "Exactly. Lord Tyrell urges a show of force, certain that House Martell will yield if threatened. Others favor a gentler hand. Ser Aerys Oakheart, who once served in the Kingsguard, suggests a marriage pact with the young Prince of Dorne. The king is weighing options but will not act without a consensus." Ned frowned, scanning the map. Dorne is not easily subdued. Even Aegon the Conqueror struggled, so diplomacy might be the wiser path. However, if the Targaryen girl truly has dragons, if that rumor is not just fancy, Dorne might see her as their chance to punish House Baratheon for old grievances. That would be catastrophic. Davos's face reflected grim agreement. Yes, it might. The king can ill afford to fight a war on multiple fronts, not after the realm's resources were drained by the conflict with the Lannisters. And winter tightens its grip. We must show unity, or the slightest spark could light a conflagration. Ned inhaled slowly. "I see why the king wants me present. My name might reassure some lords. They recall that House Stark averted a wider war by dethroning Joffrey swiftly. Perhaps they will trust one have no appetite for needless violence." Davos gave a wan smile. "Your reputation remains strong, my lord. Many remember your sense of honor. The king respects you enough to heed your voice." Ned tapped a finger on the table. "When and where is this Grand Council to be held?" "At King's Landing again." Davos explained that Stannis wished to convene it at Storm's End once the roads were passable in spring, hoping the coastal route might allow easier transport. The climate there was milder than King's Landing's. Lords from across Westeros would be invited, including representatives from Dorne, the Reach, the Riverlands, and the Westerlands. Even Lady Lisa Arryn, who had proven reclusive, might attend. With careful timing, The king believed the worst of winter storms would not entirely prevent travel, though it would be a challenge. After a long discussion, Ned rose from the table, concluding that he would ride south in the spring if that was the king's will. In return, he demanded assurances that the north would not be drained of men or resources for any rash war. Davos solemnly promised that Stannis had no desire to march upon Dorne or the Westerlands without thorough diplomacy. The war with Tywin had taught the king the value of forging alliances, albeit from a position of strength. In the subsequent days, Ned and Davos hammered out letters that would be sent to the northern lords, informing them of the council's future date. Ned agreed to muster a small retinue to travel with him. He would leave Winterfell again in early spring, though the roads might still be icy. When not drafting letters, they shared modest meals in Moat Caelan's makeshift hall, exchanging news of mutual acquaintances in King's Landing. Davos said that Tyrion Lannister kept an oddly low profile, apparently reading volumes in the Red Keep's library, content to remain out of trouble for fear of endangering Jaime's life at the Wall. Ser Lambert Lockley, who had traveled with Ned from Winterfell, confirmed that the Tyrells were not entirely thrilled with Stannis' rulership. Mace Tyrell still resented that the king had not granted him more lavish titles, but his gratitude for the victory against Tywin kept him in line. Ned suspected that if a Targaryen resurgence seemed likely, the Tyrells might reconsider their loyalties. The Game of Thrones never ended. After a fortnight of planning, Davos prepared to depart southward again, carrying letters and news of Ned's agreement to attend the Spring Council. Ned informed him that he would return home to finalize arrangements, then begin the journey in a few months' time. Standing in the muddy courtyard, battered by a frigid wind, the two men clasped forearms in farewell. Snow pelted down in intermittent flurries. Davos offered a respectful nod. "You have my thanks, my lord. The king will be relieved to know he has your counsel. May the gods preserve you through this winter." "And you as well," Ned replied, voice low. "Ride carefully." With that, Davos and his retinue set off into the southern mists, disappearing across the causeway. Ned lingered a moment, exhaling a plume of breath into the cold. He felt the old weight of responsibility settling once more on his shoulders, though he had only recently escaped the capital's burdens. The realm's troubles were not finished with him yet. Gathering his men, Ned began the trek back to Winterfell. The journey north proved as harsh as before, with drifting snow and ice-slicked roads. They paused at a small village where the locals recognized the Stark banners and hurried to offer the Lord what little hospitality they could. Ned ensured they paid fairly for food and shelter, mindful of the ravages winter could inflict on such communities. A traveling septon who happened to be staying there told Ned that many villages had welcomed the respite from war, though rumors of a Targaryen girl with dragons caused them unease. For simple folk, the name dragon still conjured nightmares of fire and burning fields. 2 weeks later, the battered column finally spied Winterfell's gray walls rising against a snowy sky. Ned breathed relief. He missed his family, missed the warmth of the great hall's hearth, missed the quiet closeness of home. As they passed through the gate, stable hands rushed to take the horses, and men scattered to carry word of his return. Inside, Ned found Catelyn waiting in the courtyard, cloaked in fur, cheeks flushed from the cold. She offered him a hug that banished the chill from his bones. "How did it go?" she asked once they stepped inside, snow melting from their cloaks. Ned spent the evening recounting all he had learned. They sat near the large hearth in the solar, the fire dancing against the walls. Arya sprawled on a bearskin rug, occasionally interjecting questions, while Sansa listened more quietly. Bran, older and more thoughtful now, studied his father's face intently. Rickon dozed in Catelyn's lap, lulled by the crackle of flames. By the end of Ned's tale, the children seemed uneasy, as if they sensed fresh storms lurking behind the talk of Targaryens and Dornish unrest. Bran's voice broke the silence. "But father, do you think the dragons are real?" Ned paused, recalling the sincerity in Davos's words about Melisandre's warnings. "I cannot say for certain, Bran. Dragons have been gone from the world for many years. Yet if the Targaryen girl somehow hatched them, we must be prepared for the unexpected. That's what King Stannis believes. Arya scowled, looking unconvinced. Maybe it's just talk, like ghost stories to scare children. We have enough to worry about with winter and possible rebellions. Catelyn smoothed Rickon's hair. Either way, your father has pledged to attend a council in spring, so that the realm does not splinter. That is what matters for now. In the days that followed, Ned settled back into Winterfell's routine, but all the while he oversaw quiet preparations for an eventual trip south. He sent ravens to the major northern lords, Umber, Manderley, Glover, alerting them to the upcoming Grand Council and urging them to remain vigilant. If any new war erupted, the North must not be caught off guard. The replies came back with grumbles about wanting no part in further southern entanglements. Yet each acknowledged that Eddard Stark was their liege, and they would follow his guidance. The weeks passed in a blur of snowfall and early nights, each day slightly lengthening as the season crept toward spring. The snows did not recede, but they no longer worsened significantly. Sansa continued her lessons in sewing and music, though she practiced archery on occasion now, determined not to be helpless again. Arya honed her swordplay with a wooden blade, taught by Ser Roderick and occasionally overseen by Master-at-Arms Shad. Bran read every book he could find on the history of dragons, muttering excitedly about their glory and the possibility that they might have returned. Rickon roamed the castle with Shaggy Dog at his heels, energetic as ever. Then, on a stormy night, Ned found himself in the Godswood, seeking respite from the bustle. The heart tree, its red leaves stark against the snow, seemed to watch him with ancient eyes carved into the pale bark. He knelt at its base, feeling the cold seep through his trousers. The water in the small pool had frozen at the edges, reflecting a sliver of moon above. He remembered kneeling here as a boy, praying to the old gods for guidance or simply listening to the wind in the branches. Now he prayed again, uncertain if the old gods heard. He prayed for peace. Peace for his family, for the realm, for all who had suffered. He prayed that the rumored dragons would not engulf Westeros in flames. He prayed that Tywin Lannister, grown sullen in defeat, would not lash out anew. And he prayed that King Stannis would not let pride or the counsel of that mysterious Red Priestess lead the realm into folly. In the hush of the Godswood, only the sigh of wind answered. At last, the snows began to recede in the latter half of the cold season. Gradually, the roads grew passable, if still muddy and ice-rutted. Time for Ned's journey south again approached. He resolved that this time he would take a larger escort than before, mindful of brigands and hidden dangers. He also decided to bring Sansa along. She was nearly of age, and her presence might help soothe relations with southern houses who remembered her betrothal fiasco to Joffrey. Arya begged to come too, but Ned refused, saying she was too young. Arya argued that she had endured King's Landing once before, but Ned remained firm. He wanted at least one daughter in Winterfell, ensuring the Starks retained influence there. Catelyn approved of sending Sansa. She can learn more of the political world, though I loathe to put her in harm's way again. At least Stannis' court might be more stable than it was under the Lannisters. Ned offered a reassuring smile. I will watch over her closely. This is not King's Landing itself, but Storm's End, which is more secure. The Tyrells or other major houses will likely attend. We must show that House Stark remains engaged. Thus, as the final snows melted in the yard, Ned and Sansa prepared for the journey. Arya sulked for a day, but she eventually regained her spirits, focusing on her training. Bran asked countless questions about possible wonders they might see along the way, but he resigned himself to staying behind. Rickon watched with wide eyes, probably not fully grasping that his sister would be gone for months. The morning of departure dawned gray and cool, with a chilly wind that carried hints of moist spring air. The gates opened once more, and a larger retinue rode forth. Sansa rode near Ned at the front, wearing a cloak of gray wool trimmed with white fur. She carried herself with quiet composure, no longer the naive girl who had dreamed only of gallant princes. Guards in Stark livery followed, along with a few wagons of supplies. They traveled the King's Road south, making better time than in the depths of winter, though patches of slush remained. Along the way, they encountered local villagers clearing fields, planting what meager seeds they had left. Some recognized Ned's banners and offered small courtesies. He thanked them with warm words, mindful that war and winter had already taxed these people greatly. At Moat Cailin, Ser Justin Massey greeted them and reported that King Stannis's envoys had arranged ships to ferry them down the coast, avoiding the worst roads of the southern interior. Ned found that a relief. Less risk of bandits on the water, though storms might be a menace. The retinue boarded stout cogs bearing the Royal Stag banner, guided by crown sailors well-versed in navigating around the Cape of Eagles. Sansa looked uneasy at the prospect of sea travel, yet she mustered her courage. The journey proved a mixture of tedium and mild peril. High winds battered the cogs, and Sansa needed assistance in the tossing waves. Ned himself found the salt spray bracing, reminding him of the old times sailing to the Vale or even the Whispers. They skirted the coast, making port at several small towns to restock. At one such stop, Ned learned from a local official that Dorne's discontent was indeed growing. Merchants whispered that Prince Doran Martell's health was failing, and more aggressive voices in Dorne pressed for vengeance or renewed alliances with Targaryen loyalists in Essos. The situation was volatile. Finally, the ships turned east, passing the storms that battered Shipbreaker Bay. Storm's End, ancient seat of House Baratheon, loomed ahead. A massive fortress perched atop rocky cliffs, defying the wrath of wind and sea. Ned remembered stories of how Stannis had endured a siege there during Robert's rebellion, sustained by smuggled onions from Davos. Now it served as the site of a prospective Grand Council. The cogs glided into the fortress's small harbor, and a sense of solemn anticipation filled Ned's chest. They disembarked onto a narrow stone quay, rain lashing them in the face. Sansa clutched her cloak tight, looking up in awe at the towering ramparts. A group of knights in Baratheon livery approached, saluting. One stepped forward, a tall man with streaks of gray in his beard. "Lord Stark, welcome to Storm's End. I am Lord Penrose, castellan in service to King Stannis. We have been expecting you." Ned inclined his head. "My thanks, Lord Penrose. Has the king arrived?" "Not yet, my lord," Penrose replied, turning to lead them up a steep path winding toward the main gate. "He remains in King's Landing for final business, but he is expected within the week. Many lords have already come, lodging within or near the fortress. Lord Tyrell arrived yesterday, as did the Tully envoy. We have not seen any Dornish delegates yet, nor has Lord Lannister appeared. The king left them the option to attend or send representatives." Ned glanced at Sansa, who was breathing heavily from the climb. "And does Ser Davos coordinate matters here?" Penrose nodded, pausing near the gatehouse. "Indeed, the hand arrived just 2 days ago. He's in the Great Hall, wrangling the lords. Please come inside, warm yourselves. We've prepared rooms for you and your retinue." Storm's End's interior corridors felt narrower than the Red Keep's, built thick and strong to repel storms. The walls seemed to hum with the wind's fury. Ned followed Penrose into a large chamber with a high vaulted ceiling, where long trestle tables had been set. A scattering of lords, knights, and stewards conferred, their voices echoing in the stone space. At the far side stood Davos Seaworth, deep in discussion with an armored knight wearing the Tyrell rose on his surcoat. Davos spotted Ned and Sansa entering and broke off his conversation, hurrying to greet them. "Lord Stark, Lady Sansa, welcome." He bowed politely. "How was your journey?" "Long," Ned said with a wry smile. "But we're here safely. We hear the king is yet to arrive. Will the council proceed soon?" Davos nodded. "Once the king arrives. Meanwhile, the lords gather, exchanging pleasantries or complaints. Lord Mace Tyrell is restless, and we expect the Tully party to push for redress of certain Riverlands damage. The Westerlands remain uncertain. Ser Flemont Brax came in Tywin's stead, apparently. Of the Dornish, no sign. Possibly they plan a grand entrance, or they might refuse to come at all." Ned cast his gaze around at the gathering. Sansa needs rest, and so do my men. I'll join you in these discussions shortly. Perhaps we can glean how matters stand before the king arrives. Davos sketched a short bow, then introduced Ned to the knight in Tyrell livery. Ser Alistair Florent, a relative of the Tyrells. Ser Alistair was polite but cool, making it clear that House Tyrell still had demands for expanded influence. Sansa excused herself with a gentle courtesy, letting a steward lead her away to her quarters. Ned, seeing her safe, turned back to the swirl of lords. He recognized Lord Mathis Rowan from the Reach, conversing with Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, who had come as Lady Lysa's envoy. Farther off stood Lady Brienne of Tarth, apparently pledged to King Stannis's cause after the war. The flicker of torchlight and the constant roar of wind outside lent an air of tension, as if the fortress itself braced for a storm of words soon to erupt. Over the next few days, Ned acclimated to Storm's End, meeting lords at informal gatherings. Sansa stayed mostly in the tower set aside for noble ladies, but occasionally accompanied Ned to dinners, where she observed the shifting alliances. She noted the arrogance of Mace Tyrell, who boasted of Highgarden's prosperity, while Brynden Tully quietly pressed for more help rebuilding the Riverlands. Tyrion Lannister was nowhere to be seen. He remained in King's Landing under watch, so the Westerlands were represented by lesser bannermen, all cautious about overtly stirring trouble in Tywin's name. On the third morning, word came that King Stannis's ships had been sighted. By midday, a procession of rowboats ferried the king and his retinue to the fortress's harbor. Ned, Davos, and the assembled lords gathered in the main courtyard to receive him. Stannis disembarked, wearing a severe expression and a black cloak edged with gold. Melisandre followed close behind, her red robes striking against the gloom of the day. Rain drizzled from leaden clouds, as though the storms around Storm's End wished to greet their old master. Stannis ascended the steps, surveying the assembled with grim reserve. He offered a curt nod to Davos, then locked eyes on Ned. "Lord Stark, you have come as I requested. Good. We shall have much to discuss." He spoke in a low, carrying voice, ignoring the drizzle soaking his shoulders. Mace Tyrell stepped forward, bowing theatrically. "Your Grace, we stand ready to serve the realm's best interests. I trust this council will yield clarity for us all." Stannis gave Tyrell a flat look. "Clarity, indeed. Let us see if you are willing to accept it." With that, he strode into the fortress, beckoning them to follow. The time for polite murmurs had ended. The Grand Council would soon commence. Over the next several days, the lords and ladies of Westeros, or those who had come, assembled in Storm's End's great hall. The king presided from a high seat on the dais, with Davos at his side. Ned and other prominent lords took seats at a long table, while lesser envoys stood behind. The wind howled against the walls, and torches sputtered in the drafts. The opening session was devoted to formal welcomes, reintroductions, and a tedious roll call of which houses were present. The vacant seats of Dorne became a subject of muttered speculation. Stannis wasted little time. He addressed the gathering in a firm, clipped tone. "I have called you here to confirm the realm's unity and to settle certain disputes. We stand at a crossroads. If we allow old resentments to fester, or give credence to spurious claims from any Targaryen pretender, we risk another war. The Lannisters were subdued, but House Lannister still stands. The Dornish brood in their deserts. The North stands far away, content if no harm comes to them. House Tyrell claims it has met its obligations. Let us speak plainly of each matter, so we may form a stable peace." Mace Tyrell bristled but maintained a respectful front. Brynden Tully explained that the Riverlands had made progress in rebuilding but would need relief from certain taxes to recover fully. The Westerlands envoy, Ser Flemont Brax, stated that Tywin Lannister would abide by his oath to King Stannis, so long as the crown demanded no further humiliations. Some nodded, others rolled their eyes. As the discussions wore on, Ned realized that the biggest question, overshadowing everything, was how to handle Dorne, and whether the Targaryen threat was real. Without a Dornish presence, the council spoke only in speculation. Then, on the third day of debate, a surprise arrived. A small retinue rode through Storm's End's gate, brandishing the sun and spear banner of House Martell. The Dornish delegation had come at last. They were led by a tall woman of middle years, her features sharp, her skin sun-kissed. She introduced herself as Lady Nymeria Sand, a rumored daughter of Prince Oberyn Martell, who had been slain years ago. With her came a handful of Dornish knights. The tension in the hall spiked when they entered, but Stannis bade them speak. Lady Nymeria, standing with regal poise, declared that she represented Doran Martell's interests and that Dorne would accept no tyranny from the Iron Throne, especially not under a Baratheon who had ties to Robert's rebellion against the Targaryens. Stannis replied in a measured voice, though Ned caught the edge of anger underlying it. Dorne's grievances are known, but the Targaryen line was ended lawfully through war. Should a new Targaryen appear with dragons? Would Dorne betray the realm? Lady Nymeria's eyes narrowed. Dorne remembers the murder of Elia Martell and her children, done by Lannister hands. If House Targaryen's last scion truly rises with dragons, my prince may consider all options. But for now, we are not fools to chase fantasies. We come only to see whether King Stannis' rule offers Dorne its rightful respect. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some demanded that Dorne swear fealty outright. Others asked the king to placate them. Melisandre watched from behind Stannis, her ruby necklace catching torchlight. Stannis lifted a hand for silence, then fixed Lady Nymeria with a steely gaze. Dorne shall have fair representation if it consents to the rightful monarchy. I bear no grudge for events decades past, but I will not tolerate sedition. Let us sit and negotiate terms that respect your pride without undermining the crown's authority. Thus, the real crux of the council emerged. Dorne wanted concessions, possibly a promise of marriage alliances or special tax privileges. The crown demanded that Dorne forsake any Targaryen pretender. The lords of the Reach eyed the Dornish with hostility, dredging up old border conflicts. The Riverlands watched warily, reluctant to be drawn into new disputes. The Westerland's envoy was careful not to inflame tensions but had little goodwill to Dorne. Ned found himself at the center of a swirl, consulted frequently by Davos, sometimes by Tyrell lords, sometimes by Lady Nymeria herself. His reputation as the man who ended the Lannister War without widespread devastation gave him a moderating influence. In the midst of it all, Sansa observed from a reserved seat, seldom speaking in the presence of so many powerful lords. Yet Ned noticed how she watched carefully, her blue eyes absorbing every shift in posture or tone. She had grown adept at reading the currents of political discourse, a skill honed by her experiences under Lannister rule. Occasionally, she whispered a quiet insight to Ned, how Lady Nymeria's posture signaled defiance, or how Mace Tyrell's fleeting smirk revealed hidden confidence. Day after day, the negotiations ran into impasses. Lady Nymeria demanded some measure of restitution for the legacy of Elia Martell. Stannis refused to apologize for Robert's rebellion, though he denounced the Lannisters' role in Elia's death as brutish. Mace Tyrell insisted that any special treatment for Dorne must not disadvantage the Reach. So forth it went, until Ned began to fear that no agreement was possible. During one tense session, voices rose to near shouting. Melisandre stood behind Stannis, eyes half-lidded, as if she saw more than the mortals bickering in front of her. Suddenly, a messenger burst in, pale-faced and breathless. He carried a sealed letter that he presented to the king. Stannis broke the seal, scanning it with mounting fury. The entire hall fell silent, sensing the shift. Stannis set his jaw and read aloud. From across the narrow sea, news arrives that Daenerys Targaryen indeed lives, rumored to have dragons grown to terrifying size. The city of Astapor in Slaver's Bay has fallen to her. She calls herself the Mother of Dragons, Breaker of Chains, and some in Essos proclaim her queen. Our spies say she gathers an army of freed slaves and hopes to cross the sea when the time is ripe. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Ned felt a chill not from the wind but from the weight of those words. Dragons grown to terrifying size? Was the impossible now real? Lady Nymeria's face lit with something akin to triumph, or perhaps calculation. If these rumors hold truth, Your Grace, what then becomes of your rightful monarchy when the last Targaryen returns to claim what she believes is hers? Stannis's face darkened, his voice cold as steel. I hold the Iron Throne by law and blood, not by a foreign girl's fancy. If she dares land in Westeros breathing fire, I will meet her with the swords of all the great houses. The question, Lady Nymeria, is whether Dorne stands with the realm or betrays it. The confrontation hung in the air. Mace Tyrell muttered curses against Targaryens, though worry flickered in his eyes. Brynden Tully sighed heavily, while the Westerland's envoy looked stunned. Davos cleared his throat, trying to reassert calm, but Lady Nymeria seemed to savor the king's anger, for it gave her leverage. Calmer heads eventually prevailed enough to adjourn for the day, each side left to consider the implications. Ned retreated to a smaller solar with Sansa, Davos, and Brynden Tully. There, in low voices, they tried to parse what might happen. If Daenerys Targaryen truly possessed dragons, and the rumor had come not just from braggarts but from multiple sources, then the entire balance of power could shift. Stannis might find himself in desperate need of Dorne's loyalty, which gave the Dornish the upper hand in negotiations. Ned spoke quietly. We must not let fear of dragons drive us into rash decisions. The realm can unite, as it did against Tywin, but only if we approach Dorne with respect. If we push them too hard, we risk fracturing the kingdom at the worst possible time. Davos nodded. The king sees that logic, but he is proud. Melisandre whispers that the Lord of Light shall triumph over any foe. It might embolden him to discount the real danger of dragons. Brynden Tully grunted. Better for him to discount it than to launch a preemptive war. Another war now would be madness. Our people have barely recovered. So, does that mean we yield to all Dorne's demands? Ned pressed his fingers to his temple. Not all, but enough to keep them from courting Daenerys. The realm cannot endure the Targaryens backed by Dorne, plus any houses that still resent Stannis. And if Tywin sees an opportunity, he might stoke the flames. They fell silent, each realizing how fragile the peace truly was. Sansa whispered, "Father, perhaps a marriage alliance. I recall how many courts discuss marriage as a way to seal alliances. Could the king or one of his loyalists marry a Martell?" Ned blinked, considering it. Stannis is already wed, and Renly, no, that ended poorly before. Yet someone of significance could be matched to a Martell, forging a bond. That might placate them. Davos's eyes lit. Perhaps. The king would bristle at using his own daughter, Shireen. But if some other high lord or lady can forge a tie, that might persuade Dorne to reject the Targaryen cause. They agreed to propose it as one option. Over the next days, negotiations resumed with renewed intensity. Stannis, though stern, recognized the logic. He authorized Davos and Ned to broach the subject of a marriage pact with Lady Nymeria. She listened coyly, hinting that Prince Trystane Martell might be of marriageable age soon. If a suitable partner of high enough status could be found, Dorne might come to an arrangement. The question was, whose son or daughter would suffice? Mace Tyrell refused to commit any child of his line, preferring not to wed them to snake lovers. The Tully envoy had no direct candidate. The Westerland's envoy was not about to tie themselves to Dorne, given old grudges. One evening, after a lengthy debate, Ned found himself alone with Stannis and Melisandre in a torchlit antechamber. The king paced irritably, while the Red Priestess stood silent, hands folded in her crimson sleeves. Outside, the wind hammered at the fortress walls. "We cannot yield too much," Stannis growled, voice echoing. "Dorne must bend the knee. Yet without them, if the Targaryen truly arrives with dragons, the realm may split. The Tyrells might waver. The Riverlands might recall old loyalties." Ned cut in quietly. "But, Your Grace, if we do not secure Dorne's loyalty, the entire realm stands on a knife's edge. This might require an uncommon solution." Stannis halted, turning on him. "An uncommon solution indeed. My line is not extensive. I have only my daughter, Shireen. I will not force her to wed a Martell unless absolutely necessary. What about your family, Lord Stark? Could any of your children form such a bond? Ned felt a pang. He thought of Sansa, who had already been betrothed once to Joffrey, suffering trauma in King's Landing. Arya was too young, Bran was crippled, Rickon a mere boy. Robb was older but already dealing with the responsibilities of the North. My lord, that would be difficult. My daughter Sansa is of marriageable age, but I hesitate to bind her to Dorne, given her past ordeal. Melisandre's voice glided through the air like smoke. The flames sometimes demand sacrifice, Lord Stark, for the greater good. Is it not better to unify the realm than watch it burn beneath a dragon's shadow? Ned's stomach twisted. My daughter has suffered enough sacrifices, my lady. I would not force her into a match she despises. Stannis glowered. Then we must look elsewhere. Still, the notion stands. A union that ties Dorne firmly to the crown. If we fail to arrange it, I may have no choice but to threaten them with force. And if Daenerys Targaryen lands with dragons, we fight on two fronts. Madness. Ned lowered his gaze. We'll keep searching, Your Grace. Let me speak with Lady Nymeria again. See if some other arrangement might suffice. Reduced taxes, a seat on the King's Council, a gesture acknowledging the wrongs done to Elia Martell. Something that placates their pride without a forced marriage. Stannis exhaled. So be it. You have my leave to negotiate. Melisandre glided closer, her ruby shining in the torchlight. Beware, Lord Stark. Darkness creeps from the east. The Lord of Light shall test us all. Do what you must for this fragile realm. Ned met her gaze, unsettled by the flicker in her red eyes. I will, he said quietly. Days turned into nights and the council dragged on. Much progress was made on lesser disputes. The Riverlands won some measure of tax relief, the Westerlands' envoy pledged further reparations, and the Tyrells gained new trade routes. But Dorne remained the crux. If the Targaryen threat was real, Stannis needed Dorne on his side. Meanwhile, rumors from Essos kept trickling in. More cities falling to Daenerys, more freedmen flocking to her banner. Some claimed the dragons were large as warhorses, belching fire that melted stone. Most dismissed it as exaggeration. Yet even an exaggerated dragon was cause for alarm. Then, near the end of what was supposed to be the final session, a Dornish messenger arrived with urgent news for Lady Nymeria. She read the scroll in silence before addressing the hall. Prince Doran is gravely ill. My prince commands me to return, but he also states that Dorne must not commit to any final alliance without his direct approval. Nonetheless, he is open to discussing terms of mutual defense with the Iron Throne, if certain conditions are met. Stannis' face tightened. What conditions? Lady Nymeria listed them. Reduction in tariffs for Dornish goods, a formal apology for Elia's murder, addressed in name to House Martell, though she did not require Stannis to claim personal blame, and recognition of Dorne's right to maintain an independent defense force. The hall erupted in debate. Some found these terms too generous for Dorne. Others saw them as mild enough to secure vital unity. Ned recognized that it was the best compromise likely to emerge. Without final input from Prince Doran, they could not seal it, but it formed a framework for an eventual treaty. Stannis, after much arguing, agreed to sign a provisional statement accepting these demands, except for an outright apology. He phrased it as regrettable tragedy inflicted by Lannister forces. Lady Nymeria noted the evasion but allowed it, seeing that this measure of regret might suffice to quell Dornish pride. With that, Dorne's participation in the realm's defense stood on cautious ground. When the session ended, Stannis declared the Grand Council complete. He commanded the lords to return to their lands, remain vigilant, and prepare for the day Daenerys Targaryen might cross the sea. Should that day come, the king would call on all houses to rally behind him. The realm might endure another war if dragons soared overhead. No one left Storm's End entirely satisfied, yet no one emerged in open revolt, either. A fragile peace had been reinforced, if not perfected. Ned prepared to depart as well. He had served his purpose, bridging differences, offering counsel. He yearned for Winterfell's quiet halls, especially after the endless tension. Yet, as he helped Sansa gather her things in the tower chamber, a sense of foreboding pressed upon him. The Targaryens were not a rumor now. They were real, with fire-breathing beasts at their command. Sooner or later, their claims would collide with Stannis' rule. If Dorne stood fully behind them, the realm could splinter. Sansa approached him, her voice subdued. "Father, do you think we truly prevented another war, or only delayed it?" He wrapped an arm around her shoulder, feeling the weight of her question. "We bought time, at least. Time to prepare, time to hope for a better solution. Sometimes that is all we can do." She lowered her gaze. "I see. Then we must return home and wait." Ned nodded. "Yes, the king has matters in King's Landing. We have our duties in the north. If war comes again, we will face it. But perhaps with these agreements, we can unite the realm when needed." Early next morning, in a storm-lashed drizzle, Ned Stark and Sansa left Storm's End with their retinue, bidding farewell to Davos and the others who remained. They boarded the same cogs that had brought them, hoping the seas would prove kinder this time. The winds buffeted their ships, and rain pelted the decks, but eventually, they rounded the coastline and headed northward. Sansa spent many hours below, queasy from the tossing seas. Ned, whenever he found a calm moment, gazed out over the gray horizon, imagining dragons soaring in the distance, lighting the sky with fire. He prayed the realm would never witness that horror. They reached White Harbor weeks later, grateful to set foot on northern soil again. Lord Wyman Manderly welcomed them, feasting them in tribute to Ned's position as Warden of the North. He asked questions about the Grand Council, expressing relief that no immediate war seemed certain. Ned was careful to emphasize that the Targaryen threat was real but not imminent. The Manderlys pledged to remain vigilant. After a few days' rest, Ned and Sansa continued by road toward Winterfell. Spring had truly arrived in the north, though pockets of snow lingered. The journey was easier than before, the air crisp with new growth. When at last they rode through Winterfell's gate, the sense of homecoming washed over them. Arya rushed out, bounding down the steps to embrace her sister, rattling off a dozen questions about the trip. Bran and Rickon followed, both delighted to see Sansa. Catelyn emerged, her relieved smile telling Ned all he needed to know about how she had worried. The days of separation had weighed on them both. Inside, a welcoming fire crackled, and the great hall bustled with warmth. Ned inhaled, realizing how precious these simple comforts were in a land so often racked by strife. That evening, after a hearty meal and the children's excited chatter, Ned and Catelyn retreated to their solar. He recounted the negotiations, the newly ominous news of Daenerys Targaryen, and the precarious pledge from Dorne. Catelyn's face grew grim. "We have faced one threat after another: Robert's rebellion, the Lannister scheme, your coup, the war with Tywin, now possibly dragons. Will the realm ever find lasting peace?" Ned gazed at the flickering fire, remembering the old godswood and the carved weirwood face. "I cannot say. The realm endures, but peace is fragile. We do our best to hold it together. Sometimes that means forging uneasy compromises." She leaned against him, the weariness palpable in her eyes. "At least we have this moment. The children safe, Winterfell secure." He wrapped an arm around her, feeling gratitude for what they still had. "Yes, for as long as the gods allow, we shall cherish it." Days passed in calm reflection. Sansa shared tales of Storm's End with Arya, describing the powerful storms that battered the walls, the menacing presence of Melisandre, the grim resolve of King Stannis. Arya soaked up every detail, then hurried off to resume her sword practice. Bran studied his father's accounts of the Dornish negotiations, wrestling with the complexities of southern politics. Rickon followed Shaggy Dog around the courtyard, oblivious to the realm's distant storms. Ned and Catelyn oversaw the planting of spring crops in the fields around Winterfell, grateful that war had not trampled their lands anew. Yet shadows remained. Ravens still arrived from King's Landing, bearing tidings of the king's continued vigilance. Tywin Lannister, rumor said, grew older and more reclusive but might yet harbor schemes. Word from Essos repeated wild claims of Daenerys Targaryen's triumphant conquests. Some said she was building ships to cross the narrow sea. Others insisted she was content to remain in Slaver's Bay. The truth was elusive, hidden behind rumor and fear. In quiet moments, Ned pondered whether the realm could truly unite under Stannis if dragons appeared in the sky. He recalled the war he had narrowly averted by dethroning Joffrey. So many had died anyway, though not as many as would have perished in a full-scale conflict. The thought of dragonfire sweeping across castles and fields was an uglier vision still. Yet he reminded himself that, at least for now, the kingdom was not embroiled in open war. Dorne's demands had been partially met, the Tyrells remained in line, and the rest of the realm sat watchful. Summer neared, or at least the latter half of spring. Winterfell's forests turned green, alive with birdsong. Ned walked often in the Godswood, reflecting on the uncertain times. At least the north was quiet, governed by ancient traditions that cared little for the squabbles of the south. If the day came when Targaryen sails appeared on the horizon, he prayed that the unity so painstakingly forged would hold. He had done all he could, from the initial coup that saved the realm from a false king to the more recent negotiations that staved off a Dornish alliance with dragons. On a brisk morning, as Ned showed Rickon how to feed the hounds, a horn call sounded from the gatehouse. A rider approached with the Stark banner, presumably returning from a journey. Ned recognized him as Hallis Mullen, one of the loyal men who had served him in King's Landing. Hallis dismounted, handed off his horse, and made straight for Ned, saluting with a weary expression. "My lord, I bring a letter from Castle Black. You'll wish to see it at once." A note of alarm spiked in Ned's chest. Castle Black was where Jaime Lannister had been sent to take the Black. He took the sealed parchment, dismissing Rickon gently, then read the contents under the dim light of a corridor torch. The message was from Lord Commander Mormont, stating that Jaime Lannister had grown restless, apparently stirring trouble among the brothers. Also, rumors abounded of wildling movements beyond the wall, and some watchers claimed glimpses of strange creatures in the haunted forests. Mormont asked for reinforcements, or at least for the north to remain alert. Ned's brow furrowed. Another frontier threatened. The realm faced potential dragons from the east, possible Lannister duplicity, Dornish wavering, and now there were unsettling rumors from the far north. He remembered the old stories of the Long Night, the White Walkers, but surely those were myths. Still, the wildlings might pose a real danger if they were gathering. Castle Black was thinly manned. Even with Jaime Lannister among them, morale might be fragile. He refolded the parchment, gazing at the ramparts of Winterfell. A new sense of unease gnawed at him. Every corner of Westeros seemed to bristle with tension. North, south, east, and west. And yet, for the moment, the realm still held together, united under Stannis' iron will. The alliances Ned had helped forge provided at least the scaffolding for stability. How long that would last, none could say. Still, as Ned walked slowly back to the Great Hall, he consoled himself that he had done his utmost to preserve the kingdom so far. The bloodless coup against the Lannisters and the subsequent war's limited scope had spared countless lives. The fragile peace hammered out at Storm's End might give the realm a fighting chance if Daenerys Targaryen truly arrived with living dragons. And though new troubles rose like storm clouds on every horizon, House Stark remained strong in the north, ready to meet the challenges ahead. Stepping inside, hearing the familiar bustle of servants and the muted chatter of his children, Ned took a breath, grounding himself in that moment of ordinary life. He could not foretell the future. He only knew that so long as he drew breath, he would strive to keep the realm from tumbling into chaos. Honor demanded no less. Duty demanded no less. Family demanded no less. Thus, in the hush of Winterfell's halls, Eddard Stark quietly resolved to stand watch as he always had, staving off the storms that threatened from every corner, trusting that, despite the swirling intrigues and rumored terrors, the realm might yet endure. The memory of how he had taken King's Landing in a swift coup remained a beacon, proof that cunning and resolve could avert unthinkable horrors. Perhaps those same qualities, tempered by compassion, would help him guide the Seven Kingdoms through whatever trials the next season would bring. And if dragons indeed returned, he would face that dawn of fire with the unyielding fortitude of the North, remembering always the quiet vow he had made in the Godswood, to keep his family and his people safe, no matter what shape the storm took.